Hello everyone. Today, I want to talk about something that lies at the core of our lives: the tension between comfort and growth. This is something that affects all of us, whether we're aware of it or not. In today's fast-paced society, it's easy to find ourselves caught between the pull of safety and the promise of progress. As we move through our lives, navigating school, work, relationships, and even our personal ambitions, this struggle between staying within our comfort zones and pushing ourselves to grow is one of the most defining aspects of the human experience. Now let's start by acknowledging the simple truth. We are wired for comfort. Our brains, shaped by thousands of years of evolution, naturally resist the unknown. Why? Because the unknown is risky. Stepping out of what's familiar carries with it the possibility of failure, discomfort, and rejection. The past, in comparison, feels safe because it's already happened. We've survived it. But what happens when we allow ourselves to live solely in the safety of the past? We stagnate. It's easy to hold on to what's familiar, isn't it? We cling to the experiences that didn't hurt us, the jobs that paid the bills, the relationships that didn't challenge us too much. And yet, while this may bring short-term comfort, it often leads to long-term dissatisfaction. Have you ever wondered why so many people feel stuck, even when they're doing everything right by society's standards? Why, despite having a stable job, a secure relationship, or a predictable routine, they still feel unfulfilled? It's because deep down, we know that true growth, true fulfillment, doesn't come from staying where it's comfortable. It comes from stepping into the unknown. Let me take you back to the ancient wisdom of those who came before us. Across centuries and cultures, the greatest thinkers, from Stoic philosophers to spiritual leaders, have told us the same thing. The path to wisdom, to becoming the best version of ourselves, involves discomfort. It involves struggle. Why? Because it's in those moments of challenge and uncertainty that we discover who we truly are. Think of the growth of a plant. It doesn't thrive by staying in the dark, safe under the soil. It breaks through, pushing against the weight of the earth to reach the light. The same is true for us. Growth requires effort. It requires risk. It requires the courage to face the unknown, to let go of the safety we find in the past and embrace the uncertainty of the future. But let's not pretend that this is easy. It's natural to fear the unknown. Our brains are programmed to ask, "What if I fail?" Or, "What if it doesn't work out?" These questions are the product of millennia of survival instincts. They are there to protect us, but they can also paralyze us. We start overthinking, analyzing every potential outcome, and before we know it, we've talked ourselves out of taking any action at all. I'd like you to imagine for a moment a baby still in the womb. If that baby had the same logic and fear that we carry as adults, it might choose to stay in the womb forever. It's safe there, after all. Warm, familiar, predictable. But life cannot be lived in a womb. No matter how safe it feels, a baby must be born to experience the world. It must face the discomfort of leaving that security in order to grow, to thrive, to live. We are no different. Many of us, especially today, live as if we are still in a metaphorical womb. We choose comfort over growth. We choose safety over risk. And while we may avoid immediate pain, we also avoid the richness that life has to offer, the new experiences, the personal growth, the deeper understanding of ourselves and the world. Now, let's be clear. This doesn't mean that we should recklessly throw ourselves into every risky situation. There is wisdom in discernment, but we must also recognize that the fear of the unknown, while natural, should not control us. It should not keep us from living fully. If we want to grow, if we want to experience life in all its fullness, we must be willing to take that first step into the unknown, even when it feels terrifying. Wisdom teaches us that comfort can become a trap. When we cling too tightly to what's safe, we close ourselves off from new possibilities. We become stagnant, and stagnation is the opposite of growth. Growth requires movement, change, And yes, discomfort. Think about the moments in your life when you grew the most. Were they the moments when everything was easy and predictable? Or were they the moments when you faced a challenge, when you were pushed out of your comfort zone? Maybe it was starting a new job, ending a relationship that no longer served you, or pursuing a passion you weren't sure would succeed. Those moments, as difficult as they were, likely shaped you into who you are today. So, how do we navigate this tension between comfort and growth? The answer lies in balance. We don't have to abandon comfort entirely. There are times when it is necessary to rest, to recharge, to find solace in the familiar. But we must also recognize when comfort is holding us back. We must learn to trust ourselves enough to take risks, to step into the unknown, and to embrace the possibility of failure, not as something to fear, but as a necessary part of growth. In a world that is constantly changing, the only thing that remains certain is uncertainty itself. The question is not whether we will face challenges or risks. The question is how we will respond to them. Will we retreat into the safety of the past, or will we move forward, knowing that growth comes from stepping into the unknown? Comfort feels good in the short term, but growth feels good for a lifetime. The wisdom of those who came before us reminds us that the greatest rewards, whether in life, work, or love, come not from avoiding discomfort, but from embracing it. So let us not be afraid to face the unknown. Let us not be afraid to grow. As we continue exploring the theme of wisdom, particularly the delicate balance between comfort and growth. In our previous conversation, we spoke about how our brains are wired for comfort and how that very instinct can hold us back from realizing our true potential. Now, I want to take this idea further by focusing on a critical aspect of our journey toward growth, trusting the courage in our hearts. As we've established, our brains are incredible tools designed to protect us. They're constantly scanning for threats, calculating risks, and weighing every possible outcome. But sometimes, that protective instinct can go too far. Our minds, in an effort to shield us from discomfort or failure, end up becoming a prison. We get trapped in cycles of overthinking, doubting, and second-guessing ourselves. But while our minds are busy listing all the things that could go wrong, there's another voice inside us, quieter, but no less important. That's the voice of our hearts. When I speak of the heart here, I'm not talking about fleeting emotions or impulsive desires. I'm talking about a deeper wisdom, an inner knowing that goes beyond logic. This is the part of us that dares to dream, to imagine what might be possible if only we took that first step. It's the part of us that knows we are capable of more, even when our minds try to convince us otherwise. But why is it so hard to trust this part of ourselves? Well, it's because the heart operates on courage, not calculations. And courage, by its very nature, requires us to move forward even when we don't have all the answers. The mind wants certainty, but the heart knows that life rarely offers guarantees. And so, we are left with a dilemma. Do we stay where it's safe, listening to the doubts in our heads? Or do we trust the courage in our hearts and take a step into the unknown? Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine a bird standing on the edge of its nest for the very first time. It has never flown before. The nest is all it knows, its comfort zone, its place of security. But deep down, the bird feels something more. It feels a pull toward the open sky. There's a sense of freedom out there, a life beyond the nest that promises new experiences, new challenges, new growth. But before the bird can take flight, its mind starts to whisper, "What if I fall? What if I'm not ready? What if I fail?" This is the same inner battle we all face. We feel the pull of security, the familiar job, the stable routine, the safe relationships. But we also hear a distant call, a voice from our hearts that tells us there is something greater waiting for us if we just trust ourselves enough to leap. The challenge lies in silencing the doubts that cloud our minds and trusting the courage that lies in our hearts. Now, let's be clear. Courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. In fact, courage only exists in the presence of fear. It's what allows us to move forward despite the fear. Wisdom tells us that fear is a natural part of life, but it should never be the deciding factor in our actions. If we let fear dictate our decisions, we will always stay in the nest. We will never experience the freedom that comes with flight. Think of some of the greatest figures in history. Leaders, thinkers, artists, inventors. What do they all have in common? They weren't without fear. In fact, many of them faced enormous doubts, both from within and from the world around them. But what set them apart was their ability to trust in their vision, to follow the courage in their hearts, even when their minds were filled with uncertainty. Consider the story of Thomas Edison. It's said that he failed over 1,000 times before successfully inventing the light bulb. Imagine if he had listened to the doubts in his mind after the 100th failure, or the 200th, or the 500th. If he had let fear and frustration take over, the world might have been a very different place. But Edison trusted the process. He trusted that, despite all the failures, success was possible if he just kept moving forward. His heart led him where his mind couldn't. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should all become inventors or historical figures, but we can apply the same principle to our own lives, no matter the scale. Whether it's pursuing a new career, starting a passion project, or simply stepping into an unfamiliar situation, the courage in our hearts is what propels us forward when our minds tell us to stop. So, how do we begin to trust this part of ourselves more deeply? It starts with recognizing that we are more than our thoughts. Our minds are powerful, yes, but they are just one part of who we are. We must learn to distinguish between the protective, cautious voice of our minds and the bold, visionary voice of our hearts. One practical way to do this is through reflection. When faced with a decision or a challenge, take a moment to step back and ask yourself, am I choosing this path because it feels safe or because it feels right? There's a difference between making decisions out of fear and making decisions out of wisdom. Wisdom often requires us to choose the harder path, the one that feels uncertain or uncomfortable, but also the one that aligns with our deeper values and desires. We also need to practice small acts of courage daily. Courage, like any muscle, gets stronger with use. Start with small risks, things that push you just beyond your comfort zone. Over time, as you build confidence in your ability to handle discomfort, you'll find it easier to trust yourself in bigger, more significant situations. And with each step forward, you'll begin to see that the heart's courage, while quieter than the mind's doubts, leads to a life that is richer, more meaningful, and more fulfilling. As I wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought. The heart knows what the mind cannot. It knows that we are capable of more than we often give ourselves credit for. It knows that growth comes not from avoiding risk, but from embracing it. And it knows that, while failure is always a possibility, it is also a necessary part of learning, of evolving, and of truly living. So, the next time you find yourself standing at the edge of your comfort zone, with your mind racing and your heart pounding, remember this. It is in these moments that wisdom calls us to trust the courage in our hearts. It is in these moments that we have the chance to step into the unknown and discover just how far we can soar. Over the past 2 discussions, we've explored the tension between comfort and growth, and how learning to trust the courage in our hearts allows us to move beyond the limitations our minds often impose on us. Now, I want to build on those ideas by talking about what happens when we take that leap, when we finally step into the unknown. This final stage is where true growth happens, where life's deepest and most meaningful experiences reside. Now, let's be honest, stepping into the unknown is never easy. It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking out at a vast, uncertain expanse. You're aware of the risks, and you may not even know what awaits you on the other side. But here's the thing. Staying on that cliff, safe and sound, will only lead to one outcome: stagnation. Stagnation may not seem threatening at first. After all, when we're in our comfort zones, everything feels fine. We're not in danger, we're not experiencing hardship, and we're not facing failure. But over time, comfort becomes a slow decay. It's like standing in still water. At first, It seems peaceful, but eventually, without movement, it becomes stagnant, murky, and lifeless. Life, by its very nature, requires motion. It requires us to move forward, to face challenges, to take risks. Consider this. Every single one of us was born into a world of uncertainty. As babies, we had no control over our environment. Everything was unknown. And yet, that didn't stop us from growing. In fact, it was the very act of stepping into the unknown, learning to walk, to talk, to interact with the world, that allowed us to evolve. This process of growth didn't stop when we became adults. It is ongoing. The difference now is that, as adults, we have the power to choose whether or not we continue growing. And that choice, more often than not, involves embracing the unknown. The truth is, the most significant growth in life occurs when we face the unknown head-on. When we move beyond the familiar, we open ourselves up to a world of possibilities. New experiences, new perspectives, new skills. These are the things that make life rich and fulfilling. But they don't come without discomfort. Growth, by its very nature, requires us to confront discomfort. It asks us to embrace the uncertainty of the journey. But here's where the wisdom comes in. Once we accept that discomfort is a natural part of growth, we begin to see it not as something to avoid, but as something to embrace. Discomfort becomes a signal that we are on the right path. It tells us that we are moving beyond the limits of who we were and stepping into who we are meant to be. Let me share with you a common metaphor that illustrates this point: the idea of the caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. Before it can take flight, the caterpillar must undergo a complete transformation inside the cocoon. This process is not easy. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The caterpillar must essentially dissolve into a soupy, unrecognizable form before it can emerge as a butterfly. This transformation requires a complete surrender to the unknown. The caterpillar doesn't know what's going to happen on the other side of that cocoon, but it trusts the process. And in doing so, it becomes something far more beautiful and free than it ever could have imagined. We, too, have the capacity for this kind of transformation. But it requires us to embrace the unknown with the same trust and faith as the caterpillar. And this is where many of us falter. We are so accustomed to control, to knowing the outcome, that the idea of stepping into something unpredictable feels overwhelming. Our minds go into overdrive, trying to calculate every possible scenario, every potential failure. But here's the truth. No amount of overthinking can protect us from the challenges of life. What it can do, however, is prevent us from experiencing its richness. In our modern world, the pressure to succeed is immense. We are constantly told to plan everything out, to have a clear vision, to avoid failure at all costs. And while planning and preparation are important, they can only take us so far. At some point, we must let go of the need for certainty and trust that we can handle whatever comes our way. This is the essence of embracing the unknown. It's about recognizing that growth doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from being willing to face the questions, the challenges, and the uncertainties that life presents us with. Let's consider some examples. Think about people who leave their jobs to pursue a passion, even when it's uncertain. Think about the entrepreneur who starts a business not knowing if it will succeed, or the artist who puts their work out into the world not knowing if it will be appreciated. These are acts of courage, yes, but they are also acts of wisdom, because these individuals understand something profound, that the greatest rewards in life come not from avoiding risk, but from embracing it. And even when we fail, and yes, failure is always a possibility, it is not the end. In fact, failure is often the very thing that propels us forward. It teaches us valuable lessons, helps us refine our approach, and prepares us for future success. Think of failure not as a dead end, but as a stepping stone on the path to growth. Every great success story is built on a foundation of failures and setbacks. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't is that the successful ones keep moving forward. They understand that the unknown is not something to fear, but something to embrace. Now, you may be wondering, how do we learn to embrace the unknown? It starts with a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing the unknown as a threat, we can begin to see it as an opportunity. Every challenge, every risk, every new experience is an opportunity for growth. It is a chance to learn more about ourselves, to discover strengths we didn't know we had, to develop skills that will serve us in the future. We can also learn to trust in our own resilience. One of the reasons we fear the unknown is that we doubt our ability to handle it. But here's the thing. You are far more capable than you give yourself credit for. Think of all the challenges you've already faced in life. Think of all the times you've overcome obstacles you didn't think you could. You've made it this far, and that's no small feat. So why not trust that you can handle whatever comes next? In closing, I want to leave you with this final thought. Life's greatest joys and deepest experiences lie beyond the boundaries of what we know. They exist in the space where we are willing to take risks, face challenges, and embrace the unknown. Yes, it will be uncomfortable at times. Yes, there will be moments of doubt. But the growth, the freedom, and the fulfillment that come from stepping into the unknown are more than worth it. So let us not be afraid to take that next step, to leap into the unknown with courage in our hearts and trust in ourselves. This is where true wisdom lies, not in avoiding life's challenges, but in embracing them. Thank you.